Rahim drove his calloused fingertips into the parched earth, the dry soil resisting his pressure. He scraped, the grit burning under his nails, until his middle finger struck something hard and unyielding. He shifted his grip, clearing away the dust. A metallic surface emerged, catching the harsh glare of the midday sun. He dug deeper, his movements quickening as the object shifted. He pulled it free. It was a seed, heavy and smooth, vibrating with a rhythmic soft pulse that traveled from the metal surface directly into his palm. The light within it did not flicker. It glowed with a steady, haunting intensity that seemed to draw the heat out of the air. He turned it over. The surface felt warm, defying the dry chill of the dust that coated his hands. He knelt in the silence of the field, staring at the luminescence, the pulse quickening in sync with his own heartbeat. There was no sound in the valley, only the faint, rhythmic hum radiating from the object. He held it closer, watching the light wash over his skin, realizing that this was not a fragment of metal, but something alive. He stood up, shielding the object with his body, and looked toward the horizon, sensing the weight of the discovery settle into the ground beneath his feet. A voice cut through the stillness. A magical seed. The passerby lunged, fingers curled, eyes locked on the rhythmic glow in Rahim's palm. Rahim pivoted, drawing his elbow back to shield his ribs and the treasure within. He tucked the pulse of light deep into his pocket, his hand clamping over the fabric to silence the hum. He did not look back. He walked, boots crunching on the dry path, ignoring the heavy footsteps following him until they faded into the distance. He reached his shack and crossed the threshold, the interior dim and smelling of stale air. His mother rose from the corner, her face etched with the exhaustion of long years. Rahim drew the seed from his pocket. The light filled the small room, casting long, wavering shadows against the walls. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she brushed the smooth, warm surface. She leaned closer, her voice barely a breath. We could sell this. We would never hunger again. The weight of her words hung in the silence. It was a simple solution to a lifetime of scarcity. Rahim looked at the glowing sphere, then at his mother's weathered hands. He shook his head. He pulled his hand away and turned toward the door, leaving the comfort of the shack for the dirt of the backyard. Rahim knelt in the dark soil of his backyard. He pressed the seed into the earth, covering it with a firm layer of dirt, his palms patting the ground flat. The work began the next morning. He hauled buckets of water from the distant river, the weight pulling at his shoulders until his muscles burned. Every day, he walked the path, his breath hitching as he climbed the embankment. Back at the patch, he pulled weeds by hand, his fingers raw from the stubborn roots. He stayed out until the sun dipped below the hills, watching for stray goats that wandered toward his mound. He chased them off with stones, his voice rasping from the dry heat. Neighbors began to gather at the fence line. They pointed at the dirt, their laughter drifting across the field like dry leaves. He ignored them, bending low to clear another handful of stones. He moved in a rhythm of labor, oblivious to the mocking eyes. Every sunset, he checked the mound, pressing his hand against the soil to feel for the warmth. The villagers continued to lean on the fence, shaking their heads at the man who spent his life tending to a patch of nothing. He did not look up. He only reached for the water bucket, his gaze fixed on the earth, waiting for the first sign of life. A tiny, jagged blade of green tore through the surface of the dirt. It did not wilt in the heat. It pulsed. By the next sunrise, it was a sapling. By the end of the week, it reached Rahim's shoulders, its leaves hardening into a substance that shimmered like polished metal under the noon sun. The neighbors stopped leaning on the fence. They stood back now, hands dropped to their sides. The growth did not slow. The stem thickened, twisting upward with a rhythmic creak that sounded like grinding stone. Within a month, the structure was a titan, its canopy spreading wide enough to swallow the backyard and cast a long, cooling shadow across the village square. Where there was once only dust and heat, there was now a metallic forest giant, its leaves catching the wind with a soft, ringing chime. The laughter had died out completely. Villagers drifted toward the fence, eyes wide, mouths parted in disbelief. They reached out to touch the trunk, pulling back as they felt the strange, steady heat radiating from the bark. Rahim stood beneath the boughs, his head tilted back, watching the light dance across the shimmering leaves. The village had fallen into a heavy, expectant silence, the mockery replaced by a collective, breathless curiosity that held the entire valley in its grip. The air changed first. A heavy, metallic scent pushed through the village, followed by a drop in pressure that made ears pop. The sky, once clear, bruised into a deep, sickly purple. Then, the wind arrived. It did not blow. It hammered against the valley. A low, guttural moan rose from the hills, escalating into a shriek as the first gale tore through the lanes. Dust clouds blinded the villagers as they scrambled for their doors. The wind had teeth. It caught the edges of thatched roofs and peeled them back like wet paper. Support beams groaned, then snapped with the sharp crack of a gunshot. Ancient oaks, rooted for generations, shuddered and bowed before the onslaught. One by one, the older homes gave way, their walls collapsing into piles of splintered wood and debris. The noise was absolute, a cacophony of flying grit, shattering timber, and the relentless, howling gale. No one dared step outside. Families huddled in corners as the storm clawed at their rafters, ripping shingles into the dark void above. The entire village was being dismantled piece by piece. The ground trembled under the assault, and the darkness outside became a swirling wall of debris, cutting off all sight of the horizon. The storm hit its zenith. Wind tore at the village, turning timber and stone into projectiles that scarred the night. Houses bowed, shuddered, and finally disintegrated under the pressure. Yet, in the center of the wreckage, the golden tree remained. The gale screamed around it, but the tree did not yield. Not a single branch dipped, not one leaf fluttered. It stood like a monument of absolute defiance in the heart of the maelstrom. Debris slammed against its trunk only to fall away, pulverized. The storm howled. Branches of ancient oaks whipped past, but the golden boughs held their position with impossible precision. It was as if the wind simply ceased to exist the moment it touched the tree. Rahim watched from behind a collapsed wall, his eyes fixed on the shimmering canopy that refused to dance. The chaos reigned everywhere else, but here, there was only a terrifying, perfect silence. As the last of the wind died down, the village lay in splinters, a graveyard of wood and thatch. The golden tree remained untouched, glowing with a steady, haunting rhythm. Dawn crept over the horizon, revealing the scale of the ruin, but the tree stood firm, a singular, unmoved sentinel in the gray light of morning. The sun rose over a broken landscape. Villagers crawled from their shelters, staring at the ruin of their lives. Shoulders slumped. Faces were etched with the jagged lines of loss and sudden, hot anger. They looked at the golden tree, then at their destroyed homes, their hands balled into tight, trembling fists. Then, the first green fruit detached from a bough and hit the soft earth. A man walked over, his movements stiff with exhaustion, and picked it up. He bit into the flesh. The tension in his jaw vanished instantly. His shoulders dropped. He looked at the neighbor whose roof had collapsed onto his own, and instead of shouting, he simply held out the remaining half of the fruit. The neighbor took it. He chewed, and the fury drained from his eyes, leaving behind a dull, quiet clarity. He dropped his shovel into the mud and reached out to help the man lift a heavy, fallen beam. It spread like a ripple in a pond. One by one, the villagers moved toward the tree. The bitterness that had defined their morning evaporated. By noon, the village worked in a synchronized, wordless rhythm. No one complained. No one argued. They cleared the wreckage of their past with a strange, calm purpose. Their movements fluid and coordinated as if they were part of a single, larger machine. The rhythm of the village was interrupted by the grinding of iron-rimmed wheels against stone. A carriage rolled into the clearing, its paint chipped and its horses lathered in white foam. The vehicle ground to a halt, and a man stepped out, his boots kicking up a cloud of dry dust that drifted toward the golden leaves. He ignored the residents, his eyes locked onto the tree with a predatory hunger. He paced around the trunk, tapping the glowing bark with the head of his cane. He turned to Rahim, his face twisting into a sharp, thin smile. 1,000 gold coins, the merchant barked, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. I will have this tree transported to the city by sunset. Name your price, boy, but know that I am generous. Rahim stood between the man and the trunk. He did not look at the merchant's outstretched, eager hand. He looked at the golden canopy, then back at the man. It is not for sale, Rahim said. The merchant laughed, a dry, rasping sound, and stepped closer, his shadow falling across Rahim's feet. Everything has a price. Do not be a fool. Rahim did not move, his stance unyielding. The merchant spat on the ground, turned on his heel, and climbed back into his carriage. The wheels groaned as he whipped the horses, riding away from the village in a fury of dust and noise. Months passed under the steady glow of the tree. The village thrived in a quiet, steady rhythm until the silence was broken by the sound of dragging footsteps. A figure emerged from the tree line, stumbling against the uneven earth. It was the merchant. His carriage was gone. The fine materials he once wore were shredded and caked with dried mud. He leaned heavily on a broken staff, his posture hunched, his eyes darting toward the ground. He reached the edge of the clearing and stopped. He looked at the golden tree, then toward the villagers working nearby, his chest heaving with shallow, ragged breaths. He trembled, his knuckles white against the wood of his staff. He expected to be driven out. He braced for the shouts and the stones he knew he deserved for his past arrogance. He did not look for a bargain this time. He did not demand attention. He simply collapsed onto a flat stone at the boundary of the village, his eyes fixed on the distant, shimmering leaves. His hands shook as he wiped grime from his forehead, his belly hollow, his face pale and drawn. He waited in the fading light, expecting nothing but the cold. A villager stepped forward, the sound of his boots soft against the packed earth. He held a wooden bowl, came rising in the cooling air. He stopped before the merchant and extended his hands. The merchant looked at the bowl, then up at the villager, his mouth working silently. He took the bowl, his fingers brushing the warm wood, and began to eat. The desperate tremor in his shoulders slowed. Rahim approached, walking steady and calm. He stopped beside the man and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. The merchant looked up, his eyes reflecting the soft, golden light radiating from the branches above. The tree does not grow gold, Rahim said. It grows peace. The merchant set the empty bowl aside. He did not look for a bargain or a way to take. He simply sat, breathing in the quiet. The village remained still in the twilight. High above, the golden leaves pulsed with a steady, rhythmic brilliance. The light did not stop at the edge of the valley. It spilled out over the dark hills, casting a warm, shimmering glow that reached far into the distance, touching everything in its path with the weight of calm.